Hi everyone. I'm going to wait a little bit for you guys to join on before we start. Okay. Good evening and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at the locally based, independently owned bookstore, Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Emma Bolden to discuss her new novel, The Tiger in the Cage, a memoir of a body in crisis, published by our friends at Soft School. A bit about our guests. Emma Bolden is the author of House is an Enigma, Meditations, and Malefica. The recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Literary Fellowship, her work has appeared in the Norton Introduction to Literature, the Best American Poetry, the Best Small Fictions, and journals including Mississippi Review, Seneca Review, Story Quarterly, Prairie Schooner, Tri-Quarterly, and Shenandoah. She is the Associate Editor-in-Chief for Tupelo Quarterly. To moderate this evening's conversation, we're joined by Chantel Acevedo, called a master storyteller by Kirkus Reviews. Chantel Acevedo is the author of the novels Love and Ghost Letters, A Falling Star, The Distant Marvels, which was a finalist for the 2016 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction, and The Living Infinite, hailed by Booklist as a vivid and enthralling tale of love and redemption. Muse Squad, The Cassandra Curse, and Muse Squad, The Mystery of the Tenth, Acevedo's new middle grade duology was published by Bazaar Bray. Her latest middle grade novel, The Curse on Spectacle Key, is a lightly spooky story set in the Florida Keys, coming September 6, 2022. She is professor of English at the University of Miami, where she directs the MFA program. Just a quick reminder that throughout this evening's broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen. I really encourage you guys to do that. We're going to be having a Q&A section after the discussion, so get your questions in so our lovely author can answer them for you. And please order your copy of The Tiger in the Cage from Books and Books and support independent bookstores. Enough of me talking. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Emma.
Hi, Chantel.
I am so glad to see your lovely face this evening.
It is wonderful to see you too.
Congratulations on your beautiful memoir.
Thank you.
I have to say, I have like 3 copies of it. And the reason this happened, which I'm grateful to have, is, I got an early copy and then I remember I ordered it as soon as I could. And then I forgot that I ordered it. I said, I better order Emma's book. And I ordered it again. So copies just keep arriving at my house that I've purchased.
No. I feel like it's like a ghost haunting you.
They just keep coming back. But it's great because I can give some away as well to friends who I know are going to love this memoir. So thank you for not coming to Miami virtually so that we can have this conversation. This memoir, I know, has been a long time coming, and we're going to get into all of that and sort of the process of telling your story and what that was like for you. But I feel like maybe we should just begin with a reading so everyone gets a sense of the work. And also to all of you who are watching, if you get the audiobook, Emma did her own audiobook work. So you're actually getting a very sort of accurate representation of the audiobook as well. So maybe you can give us a reading.
Yep, that sounds good. Yeah, audiobook preview here. Okay, so I'm going to read just a little bit from the beginning-ish of the book. I don't think that there's a whole lot that you need to know to set this up, except for at this time, it was my first year at a fine art school after going to Catholic school for all of my life. So there's a little switch there. But this is basically just a little portion about what my life was like when I was 13. The first time I saw a gynecologist, he told me that a lot of strong and successful women walked around with the very same things happening in their bodies every day. Endometriosis wasn't dangerous, he said. It wouldn't kill me, but it might keep me from feeling like a normal teenager. He wrote a prescription for stronger painkillers than the pediatrician had prescribed, as well as stronger anti-nausea medicine. He wrote a third prescription, but said that he couldn't give it to me yet, not until I took a pregnancy test. My throat closed in on itself. The room grayed. "Excuse me?" I said. It was both a question and a plea. I couldn't say what my mind was thinking, what my post-Catholic schoolgirl mind could not help but think. How can this be, since I do not know man? "Oh, no, the gynecologist laughed. He and his nurse and my mother assured me that no one actually suspected that I was actually pregnant. We just legally have to do it," his nurse said. "It's just something with the law." I listened to their hushed assurances and shook my head again and again. After my first appointment with the gynecologist, my mother stopped in front of my new school's gray concrete walls. It was built to look like a factory, an art factory, all cinder block and unfinished ceilings that were supposed to indicate an industrious dedication to our studies. It was hideous. My mother handed me the doctor's note I was to hand to the gray-haired receptionist in the office. I looked at the note. I didn't leave the car. I imagined the gray-haired receptionist seeing the doctor's name and thinking the word that now seemed too painful for me to say or think: gynecologist. I imagined her saying "oh" and raising one gray eyebrow, one side of her mouth. It occurred to me that everyone would know instantly. Everyone would know that a stranger had touched me in that place, that I had peed into a cup, that I had cried in a wet, snotty way while the nurse rubbed zeros into my back. Everyone would know that tucked in my mother's purse was the prescription for birth control pills the doctors had given me once he was sure I was not pregnant. And no one would know why I prescribed them. They'd all just assume I was a bad girl who did bad things. "Everyone's going to know," I said to my mother, and in my own voice I could hear myself wheeling toward crying. She made the sound in her throat that meant she was annoyed, which sometimes she did not out of anger, but as a way to signal that this was a big girl moment and I had to learn not to cry. "For God's sake, Emily," she said, "it's not like you have to wear them around your neck. No one's going to know, and you're late for class." The conversation was over. I kissed her on the cheek and told her I loved her. I left the car. I gave the doctor's note to the gray-haired woman in the office who said, "Thank you," and "You're good to go," and did whatever she did with all our doctor's notes. I walked the gray stairs and the gray stairwell to Mr. Harden's Algebra 1 class, where he'd already covered the board with numbers and letters and all the marks that were supposed to connect them. A few weeks later, my friend made a Pope hat from the poster board left over from my successful bid to become parliamentarian of the Student Government Association. He decided to rebaptize all of the members of the school's creative writing department, and if he liked you, he'd let you choose your name. When my friend put on his Pope hat and offered to rebaptize me, I took it very seriously. I chose a name close enough to Emily to make sense. Emma, for Emma Thompson. For the moment in Howard's End where she fell in front of the mirror and unpinned her hat and cried in gulps so perfect that I attempted to imitate her every time I cried. I'd watched the movie so many times that the VHS tape slowed and then snapped completely. As my friend mumbled in close enough to Latin above me, I kneeled and closed my eyes. I felt something shift within me, gears turning and turning one another. The lock locked. I was an Emma, and I could pretend that I had never been an Emily, passed out on the floor of the gymnasium's bathroom, mocked as Emily Boulder Butt Bolden, teacher's pet and cat-loving nerd. Emily could stay hidden inside the bathroom forever, saying her name to herself again and again and again.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That was beautiful. That was beautiful hearing you read it. And for me, it feels very special just because I've known you for so long, and I know these places you're talking about. I did a visit, an author's visit to that school, so I feel like I know there. And is there a more sort of art school moment than someone putting on a Pope hat and saying "rename yourself"?
Oh my God!
You know,
yeah. And it's a hideous building, isn't it?
It's not. Yeah, it's like brutalist, or this concrete thing. Yeah. Which belies, I think, all the creation and the creativity of those kids in that school. You know, I had a great time, you know, visiting. But yeah, let's talk about this gorgeous memoir. I feel as if you've been talking about memoir for a long time, right?
Yeah. So do I.
Yeah. And you know, I've always known you as this amazing poet. And a fantastic prose writer. But what is it? At what point did you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to tell this story? And how long between you've decided to tell it and actually beginning it? Like, was there a gap, or what, were you just right on it?
It's kind of the opposite. I kind of started writing and then I realized what I was doing, which is kind of typical for me in my process. I don't know what that means. I always start doing something and then I'm like, oh no, that's what I'm doing right now. But yeah, I had kind of, I remember actually talking to you when I first had the idea to put together like a book of essays. Mm-hmm. And some of the stuff that's in the memoir comes from those essays. But I got a job at Georgetown College where I had to teach creative nonfiction. And one of my rules back when I was an academic was that I would never teach anything that I didn't do. So I made myself write nonfiction and sort of start to learn how to do it. And it was terrifying and extremely bad at first. So I made all these fumbling attempts at essays about the subject. And then the summer after I had my hysterectomy, I just started writing. The writing just came out so much, and I actually have a notebook so that I can show what I mean here. So much so that I wrote across the pages. I couldn't even stop at the margins. And because I'm really stubborn, it took me about 3 or 4 months to finally be like, oh no, I'm writing a memoir.
Oh no.
Oh no. Oh crap. So the first pieces of this were written in 2008, and then 2013 is when I really started being like, okay, accepting in my heart the fact that I apparently was writing a memoir. Mm-hmm. And then, and it took a really long time, probably right before the pandemic, for me to get a draft that actually worked.
And how long and at what point in that process did it sort of coalesce into this is a memoir, as the subtitle says, a memoir of a body in crisis? It's also about being asexual. It's Ace Week. You know, Ace Week is Ace Week. About your asexuality, about religion and family. But at what point in the process did it sort of coalesce into this is what this is? Or was it always clear in what it was going to be?
It was not. It's one of those things where I kind of had to just follow the threads. I'm not gonna pull it out now, but I posted a picture on Instagram of what my last draft looked like, and it was this big. All of pieces of paper that were cut into pieces. All of the strands didn't come together. Like the asexuality strand, I wrote that essay really late. I'm going to say that didn't come in until 2019, 2018, 2019. So it took me a while to figure out how all of the threads were connected and then figure out how I could make it appear connected to other people. That was one of the biggest challenges. I will say that for a long time, this was in a very linear, like I tried to make it like a real story, like I tried to make it into like a really linear narrative. It did not work. So it really took my agent saying like, you got to break this into pieces in order for everything to coalesce.
Yeah. And it sounds like perhaps with the help of your agent pushing you into something that's actually closer to poetry.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, haven't I literally, this is like, that was just, I was like, oh, that's what this is, isn't it? You're totally right. I didn't even realize that before.
Yes, they're very, I mean, I'm such a fan of your poems. And so reading this is like, it's like the biggest Emma Bolden poem, right?
It really is.
Beautiful. But it does that thing where that your poems do, right? That it's laying down pieces and then the threads come together and you're like, oh, this is what this is about.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I even I have some chapters where they're like two sentences that use white space in the same way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really had to look outside of, like the diagrams that I would put on the board for my students. I really had to look outside of that for structure. And when I was putting all of the different threads together, I listened to Bolero twice a day at least, because that's the kind of structure I was going for, where something repeats and repeats, and as it keeps going, it like gathers the energy. That sounds like I'm getting like very hippy dippy chirpy, but it's true. It gathers the energy of what came before it, so it just sort of like crashes at the end.
No, it's like craft. It's craft. It's beautiful. Yeah. I love talking this stuff. And to not get too far into the weeds for those who are watching, but there's this wonderful book by Jane Allison called Meander, Spiral, Explode. And have you read it?
That my agent was like, you need to read Meander, Spiral, Explode. And she talks about fractal structure. And I was like, there we go.
I've never read a craft book like that, but it does it describes what you're describing, right? That this shape, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly it. And for some reason, that book had me turn to music a lot. So I listened to Bolero, but I'm just going to be honest, listen to The Light of the Seven from Game of Thrones is very, very much the same thing. And I read an article with the composer where he described how he put the piece together and why he put it together that way, and how it's meant to represent all these different parts of like people learning new, facts coming into the story, and people, coming to realize things. And I was like, that's the structure that I need.
Yeah. Well, to just step on poetry one more time, and then I'll get off the poetry thing.
You can always step on poetry all you want with me. I'm here for it.
On it. There's so much vulnerability, obviously, in a story like this, right? Like you're just it's very raw. But your poetry is like that too, right? So much of your work is like that. I think my favorite poem of yours is "The House is a Body." The House is a Body. Did I get that right? The House is
an Enigma.
Yeah, House is an Enigma. Yeah. That one.
I have like 1,000 poems that have the same title, so that's why I was like, I don't know. They're
Bodies and Houses. House is an Enigma.
House is an Enigma.
Yes. Yeah. It's so vulnerable too, and it's touching on similar themes, right? And I was wondering if those feelings, right, that vulnerability is easier to, did you find it easier to access in prose and memoir or in poetry, or is it the same? Does one elicit in you a more somatic response as you're writing it? I'm just wondering about sort of that gear shift.
I have to do it in poetry first before I can do it in prose, because it takes me a long time to work through the emotion. It just takes me a long time sometimes to figure out what I'm doing. I'm just going to be honest. Like that poem, "House is an Enigma," it's a poem that now I can say is about having a hysterectomy before you've had children. I had no idea that that's what the poem was about until it got accepted for Best American, and I had to write an author's note, and I was like, because I had no clue. And then I was like, okay, well, what made you write this poem? And I remembered it was this particular like falling down house that I was driving by one day, and I was just like, why do I always like think this house looks sad? I'm just projecting that idea on the house. But then I realized, oh wait, that was on the way to my doctor's to talk about scheduling the hysterectomy and all of that. And then I realized, oh, that's what the poem was about. Yeah, so I think that like much more like gut wrenching is in prose. I mean, there are parts of this book that part of the reason why it took me so long to write is because I could not go there. Like I could not go there. It's just like a tiny paragraph that's pretty late in the book where I write directly to a friend, and like writing that paragraph just destroyed me. Like that was one of the hardest things I've written.
Yeah, I find nonfiction the hardest to write in that sense. You really do sometimes have your own kind of physical response to what you're writing.
Yes, like absolutely. Like sometimes I was just like dragging my bones out of the seat afterward.
Yeah, you're processing stuff, you know?
Yes.
And I'm one of those people who I'm thinking as I'm writing.
Oh,
right? Like the thinking doesn't happen before the writing. I'm not thinking clearly until I'm writing. And so sometimes you're shocked by your own.
Oh my God. Like when I write fiction, I went back and like looked at a draft of something I wrote in fiction. I was like, I have no memory of writing this at all. Like, no, because yeah, it does kind of pop up like that. Mm-hmm. It's weird though, because a lot of times when I write poetry, the whole thing's in my head before it gets to the page. But but that's not the way that it works with prose.
That's very interesting. That's
really weird.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll step away from the craft stuff. We're like such dorks that way, but
I know. I'm like,
it's like being back in that old Auburn office with you, Emma, with our mustaches on the wall. Not our personal mustaches, everyone. We had like a little.
There weren't someone else's that we stole either.
Right. Scalp anyone. It was gag mustaches, and I don't even know why they were up on the wall, Emma, but we love them. So
they needed to be there. Oh, my friend Hannah sent them to me. Oh my God, I just now remembered that. Okay,
that's right. Well, then Hannah was with us, and she's amazing too. Okay, so this is a memoir that obviously is very personal and very full of purpose. But my experience in reading it too, and I think it probably is true for most people reading it, probably most women reading it, is reading those moments where the doctors are dismissive. Like those to me were the most powerful, the most heartbreaking, the most kind of re-traumatizing, because you think about the times that happened to you as well. And so I wanted to ask about kind of purpose, right, with the memoir, right? Because it's obviously you're sharing your experience, but do you have like a greater hope for it? Beyond just, I'm just going to share what happened to me. Do you have a greater hope for that?
Yeah. And I think that, I think this is going to sound strange, but I think that in a lot of ways, me sharing my personal story and sharing it for me is part of the larger thing that I wanted it to be, the larger purpose, because I mean, I just had my launch. This week has been so crazy, but I had my launch on Tuesday, and one of my cousins walked in, and I had this moment where I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this, because like my family didn't even know that. I mean, they knew like vaguely that I had problems. They knew they had a lot of surgeries, but like they didn't necessarily know how bad it was, or that I even had a hysterectomy. And those kind of things. So everything was kept, like, I kept everything so private because I felt like it was all things that you weren't supposed to talk about. And so it got to where like the way that my life was and the things that controlled what I could do in my life were these like deep, I felt like there were these deep, dark secrets. And then after I had my hysterectomy, I just remember being like, why? Like, why do we feel like talking about these very natural things that happen to our bodies why do we feel like it's so taboo? It shouldn't be. And I think that the fact that it is so taboo is partly why it's women get gaslit so often by their doctors, because you're afraid to get a second opinion. You're afraid to talk to your close friends even about like what's really happening to your body. So yeah, I think a big purpose is creating a space where it becomes, people feel safe talking about those experiences and those parts of their bodies and their lives.
Yeah. And I think the sense of not being alone, maybe.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, I really, really wanted to write the book that I needed, because I really did need it. I was extremely lucky because my mom, Chantel's met my mom, so she knows. It's like my mom has very little filter. Like she, especially with me, and she had problems too, so we got to talk about that. But when it came to the stuff like, like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to have children. I don't think I can wait anymore. Even if I can, I don't know. Is it okay? It was hard because I felt so alone.
No, absolutely. My first thought upon finishing your book, and probably throughout as I was reading it, was I just want to buy 1 million copies and just hand them to doctors too.
Oh yeah.
Hand them to doctors too, because or put them in medical schools. When a woman starts to cry in your office, so often the response is like, "Oh, well, she's obviously unstable. Not she's heard terrible news, or this is really frightening." But there's an immediate, like, if you've ever shed a tear in a doctor's office, like you feel it right away. The tone shifts in the room. You know what I mean? And suddenly you're not being listened to in the same way.
Yeah. And sometimes it's after things that are incredibly painful, because I would have these like incredibly painful exams and like cry and get upset, and they were like,
why are you so difficult, right? Like, I've been told that you're difficult, right? Like, this has never been so difficult for other people. Like, that kind of weird, all of that. Your book was tough, man. Like, it was a tough read, but I think it's an important one, because those things happen and you feel like, it's just me, right? Like, it's just me, and so it's I think for a sense of sisterhood and community, and so that people don't feel so alone. I think it's got such a higher calling, your book.
Oh, thank you.
Not to sound like super like Catholic, but there's
we're talking about this book, so
well, we're para-Catholic, so we can talk about it at that level. You started mentioning your parents here too, right? I know how close you are to your mom and dad, and how lovely they are. I wanted to read just a little tiny paragraph that I thought was so simple, but I think so evocative and representative, I think, of that relationship. And it's at the end of, I'm not sure, of chapter 111. Oh. If it sounds like there's 111 chapters.
I know.
She showed that there's like little ones too, right? Like, it's in case anyone.
Yeah, they're short.
No, it's lovely. It's constructed in such a beautiful way. But at the end of that chapter, you write, I told myself that when I was sick, my parents were the only people I let in because they had to love me just because they were my parents and I was their child. It's such a vulnerable statement. This was wrong and I knew it. No matter how much I broke, I knew that they would still choose to love me. I knew they had the choice. I knew what kind of people they were. I know what choice they would make. And it's such a beautiful paragraph, such a beautiful moment. And so it got me to thinking about them. And I was wondering, did they know that you were writing the memoir? As you were writing it, did you check in with them? Did you feel like there were any moments that you had to check in with them before putting it out there?
Like in terms of like, are you going to be uncomfortable if I
probably, like, are you okay, Mom, if I say this? Or
I probably should have more than I did. They knew what I was doing, but yeah, my parents and I have kind of like a long-standing thing where it's just like y'all don't have to read it, you don't have to come to readings. It's totally okay, because I feel like we had so many readings when I was in high school, and they had to listen to so many like 14-year-old me being sad and copying T.S. Eliot in a horrible way that like they but I did check with them about certain things. There were certain things that I had to fact check because there are certain things that I don't remember. And some of the conversations that I had with my mom actually ended up as notes in the book, because she just, she kept saying like, don't be specific because you don't have the papers for that surgery, and just, make sure that you don't mention names and don't mention this. So, a lot of that ended up just because I think it's indicative of the kind of fear that women have, because like a lot of times, especially if you live in a kind of small place like I do, like if you have a really bad experience with the doctor, it can screw you with the entire hospital, like, so you have to just be really careful. So yeah, I didn't check with them as much, but I made I tried really, really, really hard to not, I didn't want to put anything in the book that would hurt anybody who might read it. So I tried to be really, really careful.
Yeah. She was like your legal consultant on the side, like, no.
She was. Yeah. She's like, no hospital name. Like, she did not want to worry about Depo-Lupron at all. Like, wow. She was just like, they're gonna come after you.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, it's the kind of fear that you have after a lifetime of struggling with doctors.
Sure. Your relationship with them I've always found it to be just so beautiful and loving, and sort of an example of what a parent-child relationship should be. And so anyway, if she and Dave are watching, Cheryl and Dave, you did a good job. Thank you for raising up my beautiful friend. But no, yeah, I think I was interested in that. I was wondering their role in that process. Let's switch gears again. And I wanted to ask about research, because I know that you are an amazing poet, but you're also quite the scholar, and your poetry, quite the scholar. My monocle.
I'm going to put my pinky up.
The mustaches. I know your poetry in the past has some of them, for example, Maleficae, very heavily researched, right? About witchcraft, like in prior centuries. So I was wondering about the research you found that you had to do for this memoir. Was there anything that, as you were reading and researching, you uncovered and you thought, oh, I have to include that, or something that you learned and you didn't include, but now's your chance to tell us about it?
Oh my God. Okay. So I will say that research for this book, I actually wrote an essay about it. It was like that intense, like that level of craziness. There was speaking of Depo-Lupron, there was this whole thing about Karen Klein was the woman, and she's the first person to sue Depo-Lupron, and or the makers of Depo-Lupron, and to talk about like how damaging it is to women's bodies. Like, she had early arthritis, became unable to have children. She developed like Hashimoto's thyroid, lost tons of her bone mass, and all of these things that people who were on Depo-Lupron in the early days before they really, they really still haven't tested it in women that much. It's a drug that was made to cure prostate cancer, and they realized that it could put women in menopause, so they started treating endometriosis that way. So there was a huge thread about Karen Klein's case, and when I was doing my rights and permissions, I went to all the websites and everything was gone. Wiped clean. Like, like even FDA things had like even some like FDA notices about dapagliflozin had just been like wiped off the internet. It was just gone. It was just gone.
Mm-hmm.
So first I used the Wayback Machine to make sure that I hadn't just lost my mind completely. And then I finally found another article that mentions Karen Klein's case and also mentioned the fact that all of the stuff had disappeared. So I was like, it's not just me.
Mm-hmm.
So research was like, it was a huge part of this, but it was also, it harshed my vibe. Like it was really, I just remember I had like 2 weeks where I was like, how do I put this back together again? Because I have to take all of this out. What do I do?
Wow. Is there any, like, do you ever feel like in your wildest dreams, you know, that someone, some lawmaker, some scientist is going to read your book and like, it'll jumpstart sort of new studies? Is that something that has ever crossed your mind, or how can we make that happen? Who can we mail it to?
I know. I'm like, we could just put this to somebody. There's a woman in Boston who is doing some incredible work with endometriosis, and it was really interesting because I read an article about, I don't remember her name right now, of course. now that I need to be remembering her name, it's gone. But her story was like super similar to mine, and she had the same thing to where she had endometriosis after having a hysterectomy. And she's doing some great work, but I mean, just the fact that like literally thousands of years, endometriosis, we've known about it and we still don't know what causes it. And we don't know how to cure it. We don't actually effectively know how to treat it because there's just no research.
Right.
So yeah, that would be great. It's like, I think that I've been dealing with it so long that I don't even hope about things like that anymore.
Yeah.
But that would be great.
Yeah. Well, I feel too that like now's a moment where there are so many outlets where people are talking and sharing their story.
Yes.
You know, like I've somehow landed on like the menopause side of TikTok, for example. There's so many people talking about like their experiences and lack of training in the medical field, right? So a lot of OBGYNs are trained, you know, to deliver babies, but not the other end, you know, of a woman's reproductive cycle, right? Like all or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think we're in a moment where people's stories are being shared a lot more, you know, broadly.
Yeah. And you have a lot of grassroots movements. Like after I had my hysterectomy, the group that saved my life it's called Hyster Sisters. And it's a group of women, and they talk about like all the different aspects of having a hysterectomy, having, you know, fibroids, endometriosis, all those different things. But they also have like Hyster Sister approved doctor lists and things like that. So
yeah. Well, I'm hopeful and confident that your book will find its way into these important spaces and just amplify these stories. Yeah, I think so. I think it will. I'm going to ask you a terrible question, which is remember titles of other books. And the reason it's a terrible question is because I'm sure at the moment we stop talking, you'll remember a million titles. But now I'm going to ask you, and this is what happens to me at least whenever I'm asked for things. For example, the title of your poem, which is my favorite, I blanked on it.
That's totally okay.
A little fairy like jumps into your head in the moment and erases everything, erases the whiteboard just to screw it. But hopefully not this time. What are other memoirs or did you read other memoirs that you looked to as you were writing this book? Other memoirs maybe that are related to your subject matter that you can recommend? What else would be on your list?
Let's see. There's a book called I'm sorry, it's my nonfiction conveniently is located right here. And I'm gonna forget the name of this book. An Elemental Thing by Elliot Weinberger. Okay, everybody could see my Star Wars figurines from all the Yodas. An Elemental Thing by Elliot Weinberger. It's unbelievable. Like the book is just unbelievable, and it's all about like ocean currents and stuff and like spirals. But that was the book that really, I think, taught, it's like emblematic of the fractal form in nonfiction. So that book, I really loved The Brand New Catastrophe by Mike Scalise. I hope I got that right. But it's a book about, so he went to the emergency room for what he thought was like a super bad headache, and it turned out that he had a brain tumor in his pituitary gland that they didn't know about, and it exploded, which is insane to think. But so it caused him to have, I think it's acromegaly is how it's pronounced. It's the same thing that Andre the Giant had. So it's this really honest, beautiful book about how you deal with having something that insane happen and just completely change your life. And it's really funny. And it also talked about the cultural parts of it. So that one, and The Two Kinds of Decay by Sarah Mancuso. It's like a shorter book, but it's a bunch of lyric essays about like her. Have you read it? Okay. She has like this crazy, she's suddenly paralyzed, and she has this crazy like blood disease, and they have to like take her blood out and clean it and put it back in. It's insane. But it's a really gorgeous memoir. And it also has like these small facts. Like I always remember they told her she could eat like whatever she wanted because it would take the fat out of her blood. So like while she's having these treatments, she would just like chow down on French fries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, those are all great. I mean, what a great list you just put together for like a potential class at a med school, right? Important medical memoirs that students should be reading. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing all of those. You came through like a champ.
I can't believe I did that. That was
I tend to blank out terribly on that question whenever I'm asked. So I was ready to apologize for asking. Well, I'm going to ask one more, but before I ask it, I'm going to remind everyone to please order The Tiger and the Cage from Books and Books, which is Miami's independent bookstore. And they are an amazing bookstore paired with Emma's amazing book. I mean, win-win, right? So please order. And also, if you haven't done it yet, please ask a question because we're getting to the ask a question portion of the evening. But my last question is, what are you working on next? Or what are you working on now?
What am I working on now? I am doing something that I never in my life would have imagined myself doing. I wrote a fantasy novel.
What is this, Emma? Tell me about this fantasy novel.
Yeah, I wrote a fantasy novel. It's kind of like so like as you mentioned, completely upset. You know, I did so like crazy amounts of research for Maleficae. Like I was in that Auburn library with the librarians. I know that they were like, this girl is insane because she's just like, can I get like every book about, you know, religious practices in medieval Europe that you have? So a lot of the book is kind of like things that actually were practices in medieval Europe, like turned up a little bit. It's kind of like Game of Thrones meets The Handmaid's Tale, I'd say. Except
cool.
Hopefully, very hopefully, without, it's also like, you know, there's like, it's very queer.
Okay.
Very extremely queer too.
Very interesting. Excellent. That must be fun.
It was so much fun. But yeah, that's the thing that I went back and I was like, I have no memory of like writing this scene. So I was like, that's pretty cool. So we're going to leave it there.
You were in that fugue state, right?
Yes. Yeah, you really do get into this like weird, fiction is like a whole other world because you get into this like weird dissociative place and then you are like, oh, okay.
Like lucid dreaming. It's like lucid dreaming.
It is. It so is though.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so excited. And we will talk about that at our book club.
Yes.
Book club. We'll talk about that off camera, but I think it's time for questions. So I believe that I can see them. I can see them. So I'm going to ask questions, and we've got, speaking of book club, Maureen Seaton, our friend.
Hi, Marie.
Has a question for you. She says, Emma, I love you. Where did you get your wonderful sense of humor?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, that's so sweet. I think it's like, well, both of my parents have a really good sense of humor, I think. So I kind of like it, in order I had to develop it at some point. But yeah, I totally think it's my parents, and then like me reaching a certain point and realizing that, because I feel like I used to take myself like so super seriously. I did not have the best sense of humor. So I think now I'm just like,
I think you're one of the funniest people I know for sure.
Oh no. Well, so are you. I mean, like,
no, but you're good. And if you're interested in following a funny person on Twitter, Emma's the one. She's Emma Bo on Twitter, and you just make me laugh every day. But I think there's something, like you've been through some tough stuff. You know what I mean? And
God, yeah.
There's a balance, I think, to that.
You have to laugh about it. I mean, because like some of the things that happen when you're dealing with illness, especially like these kinds of illnesses, are just like completely absurd and insane. Like once you have like your cat attack your catheter bag, you can't, like, you have to be like, you have to.
Which cat?
Morgan, the cat of my youth.
Oh, the cat of your youth.
Yes, Morgan. Gertrude Stein would have been like, I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we've got another question from Sarah Lynn Rogers. Emma, you've mentioned before that you've had to write poems first to be able to arrive at the essays prose that this book became. Is your poetry collection House is an Enigma sort of the prequel to Tiger, or are all of your collections in some way?
Yes, I would definitely say that like House is an Enigma is the House of the Dragon to the Game of Thrones that is this. But yeah, it definitely is. I had to write that book. I had to write the poems in that book before I could get here. And some of the stuff I wrote kind of simultaneously. So I would get it out in poetry, and then I'd be able to put language to it in prose. So yeah, no, it's definitely a prequel.
Yeah. And it sounds like Maleficae is a prequel to this fantasy novel in a way, right?
Yeah, totally.
Cursor to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that I'm thinking about it, like Meditation's like my second book. It's like it's a really weird book, but I do think that a lot of that came out of there's a lot of stuff in there about like the time that I was unable to feel my arms or legs, and like Meditations is kind of about that moment where your body fails you, and like how do you exist in a body that's failed you in that way. So it is kind of like that.
Yeah, I feel like no matter whether the writer is working in one genre and one form only, or they're doing a lot of things, like you're doing prose and nonfiction and fiction, and it's in a different genre, it's fantasy. Regardless of whether it's one or the other, I feel like you can sort of look at a writer's work all together, like binging one author's work, and you can start to see all of the connections,
Yes. And if you, that's, I think, why I admire like Anne Carson so much. Is, I mean, like, she's crazy. Like she just like puts everything, when you look at everything together, everything is connected in this insane way, and it's almost like it's just one piece of art that she just increasingly does not give a crap about being like she's like, I'm going to put this book in a box. I don't care,
Right. Her universe keeps expanding, really.
It does. It's like the Star Wars extended universe is Anne Carson's work.
Right. You introduced me to her. Not to her physically, but you introduced me to her work. I remember. And you're like, this is crazy. You have to read it. And it was good. It was crazy. Yeah. And it was all right. We also have a question from Megan Lee. Hello. Emma, could you talk about the habits of mind or craft from your poet life that served you well in your memoirist life, and what didn't serve you well? What did you have to learn anew?
I had to learn to say things. It's one thing I had to learn that, like, I know, like, oh, I can't just imply this for 300 pages. Like, I have to, and knowing when to come out and say those things, though, I think also was a poetry thing. My poetry teacher in college would always say, like, sentiment is okay as long as you earn it. So she would talk about, like, the places in a poem where you can put, where you can put, like, more things that would seem like more cheesy, I guess. So if the whole poem was that. So I think a lot of my thinking about coming out and saying things came from poetry, but my reticence to come out and say things also came from poetry. If that makes sense. I also think like, I still thought about, like, okay, if I put this break here, what happens in that leap? Like, what's the reader taking with them from the previous section? So it did help me in that way. But I also, like, will write myself into these, like, poem problems where I'm like, have this, like, super dense passage that makes no sense, and I'm obsessing over, like, a comma in it, and I have to be like, big picture, Emma. Let's look at the big picture.
Poetry knots, like, require, like, needles to undo. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that made sense in my head.
No, it's like, I have this like a cross that I had for, like, my first communion, and it's like 1,000 knots. That's a poetry knot.
Right.
Yeah. When you get, like, a chain.
Yes. Whereas I feel like if you're working in a novel, those knots can be impossible too, but oftentimes the solution is, like, this massive, like, thing to do, right? Like, change the setting or just kill that character, like, it's like a massive thing. But poetry knots are these little intricate, it's like one word, it's a syllable.
Yes.
Breath, you know what I mean? And it's undoing that can be hard.
And in novels, you can kill people too.
True.
That helps.
We've got one more question, and it is from Sam Saxby.
Hi.
And Sam says, "Hi, Emma. Happy Pub Month. Somehow only now am I realizing how significant October has been in your life, as it's notably mentioned throughout your memoir. And of course, it's your pub month. I'm wondering, did you have diaries and journals to revisit during your memoir writing process? Or did you rely on rememories and the complete operative reports you managed to get? The high intricate level of detail throughout the book is impressive and immersive."
Yes and yes. I did. I had a lot of journals. And yeah, I had a lot of journals. I think I mentioned at one point, like, a lot of them were doctored, like, where I'd cut things out and, like, black things out. And so I hate that part of myself. I also, for a while now, I guess it would be 10 years, I have those 1 line a day journals where you literally like write 1 sentence a day. And I have an app where you do something a day. So I had this, years ago, I took this medicine that had some really crazy side effects if you had autoimmune problems. And one of them was it just wiped out your short-term memory, like your memory was gone. So I kind of got in a habit of documenting everything so I'd remember what happened when at that time. And I've tried to be less obsessive about it as time has gone on. but yeah, and the surgical records, that's like a whole other thing, because, like, I got the surgical records for my hysterectomy thinking that, okay, this is going to tell me what really happened and why I had, like, this huge awful bleeding episode after my hysterectomy. And I was like, this is going to tell me why. I'm going to know what happened. And so I got, like, this much paper when it finally came to me, and I knew where the details were supposed to be, and it said, like, page missing, data not included. So everything was missing. So where I had information, I tried to get as specific as possible. But it was also really important for me it was important for me to show that I was trustworthy, even though I realized saying this that it makes me sound completely unreliable. but it was really important for me to be honest about what I absolutely could not remember.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see that throughout the book.
Yeah.
The moments where you talk about that. But I did get the sense as I was reading it a couple of times that, like, gosh, you had to play detective. You know what I mean?
Oh,
especially with some of those records.
It took years
Yeah.
for me to get the records. They would not even send them to my doctor. I finally got on the phone with somebody in the basement who was about to quit and didn't care, like literally. And she was like, all right, fine, here you go. I'm gonna send it to y'all. Everything I got. And so I got like,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing, right? What and the things that you were surprised to see in there too was really interesting.
Oh
Things
my God.
Good to see. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Especially, you know, I had to go to the emergency room and I got my records for that were in there. And I was like, that's not me. Like, they got my blood type wrong. Like everything was wrong.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, everyone watching, you really do need to get your hands on this book. It is a roller coaster. It is informative. It is beautiful, beautifully written. You're just a master at your craft.
Oh,
But most importantly, I think it's, like I said, I think it's a book with a real purpose and a higher calling. And I have great hope that it'll change lives and open eyes and do such good in the world. So thank you so much for writing it and for being you. And thank you to everyone who asked a question. And thank you to Books and Books for hosting us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chantel. This was amazing. I really
you guys are awesome. I had such a great time watching this. I know this story is, you know, really important for women, for me, myself. I just love this. On behalf of Books and Books, you know, we're so happy to give you the space to share. I know being vulnerable can be, you know, really hard. And Chantel, thank you so much for moderating. Yeah, this was such a great night. And to the audience, thank you so much. Yeah, please buy Tiger in the Cage. So yeah, I think we're gonna call it a night. Again, thank you so much. And yeah. Bye guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Good night.